One of the most luxurious brands is Rolex. In the globe, currently is estimated to be around $8 billion and has a long history beginning with an orphan a century ago. Stolen inheritance victimized teenager toward him with nothing else. Besides the will to conquer his obstacles, he fled his hometown and relocated to a different nation. After several years of making progress, he chose to pursue his dream and launched a watchmaking company. Little did he understand that this company, a risk, would push him to introduce new watches, revolutionizing the entire industry, and building an empire worth $1 billion. A string of bad luck. Germany's Kumbach is where Hans Wilsdorf was born. By parents Anna, and on March 22, 1881. The second was Johann Daniel Wilsdorf. Son of three, his family had a business. A somewhat profitable business selling passed down from his grandfather, putting iron products in the mid-range in class. Sadly, his mother fell ill while the following years and passed away in 1892. Even worse, his father would do it a year later, additionally pass away, leaving Hans an orphan at 12 years of age. Presently in his mother's care, his uncle made a quick decision to liquidate his family's company and employed a portion of their financial aid for college, combining the three of them in a lovely high-profile boarding school, Ernestonum Coburg, in Germany's Bavaria. Early on, Hans despised this choice, and as a result of adjusting to the new town, Hans was considered a stranger and was frequently made fun of by boys because, as to his religion, to get over his challenging upbringing, he made the decision to concentrate on school. As he aged, he realized that even though he disagreed with the choice of his uncles, became a crucial consideration. For his achievement, our uncles didn't disregard us. Whatever their circumstances, fate made me develop independence very early in my life, caused me to develop the habit of maintaining my possessions and keeping an eye. I think it's because of this that it goes back. I owe a lot of my success to Hans' love to read, and eventually became quite the talented pupil in the subjects where he particularly excelled. He studied languages and mathematics. He was always fluent in both French and English, interested in travel, and aware that having a language would be incredibly helpful, would ultimately play a significant part in his career. He made friends with the teacher at school, Swiss youngster who would share tales with him about his birthplace in the city of Le Chaux de Fonds, a well-known company that was recognized for its extensive history in the watchmaking sector. And Hans, really curious about the location by himself, Hans finally had enough of the manor that boarding school and returned to his life in the relocation of Germany to Geneva, Switzerland. And at the age of 19, he secured employment as an intern at a multinational pearl. This corporation was an exporter, purchasing pearls from different markets and would categorize, assess, and pack them for sale to jewelers. He observed the business wasn't really putting forth much work, but maintaining a healthy profit. He immersed himself there to understand their business strategies and was profitable for his age. Money. Hans one day got a letter from he received a job offer from a buddy. Business known as Cuno Cortan. One of the biggest was Cuno Cortan. High-end watchmaking companies was exporting around, and at the time, Swiss francs worth of pocket change, million each year watches. They additionally created several of their own scratch-built watches. This renowned business was situated in Los Angeles. Chaux de Fonds, the location he has always desired to go, despite the fact that the firm he was with for him working at was more advantageous. His interest in the area and the trade in watches was more successful. Consequently, he relocated to Les Chaudet in 1900. I enjoy my job at this company. He was employed as a correspondent for England and clerk because of his writing ability and read the English he had studied in the past. School, while earning a salary from a wage of 80 Swiss francs per month. Additionally, he was in charge of winding daily hundreds of pocket watches, and he selected them after checking their accuracy. A fantastic understanding of watchmaking and learned a lot of information, discusses how different watch kinds were produced. But because his time there was limited, he having to serve in Germany once more. Following just 2 years at Cuno, the Army Cortan, 22 years old, and out of the service, he to work for went to London, England, another manufacturer of premium timepieces there. He was in charge of a larger role and was now responsible for expanding sales throughout the course of 2 years. He remained there. He was successful in finding more customers for the business, and their sales increased with time. He had already begun to consider establishing his own watch and jewelry business, was studying as much as he could to increase his knowledge for the future business. He also met his wife during those years, Florence Frances May Crotty, potential spouse, and soon after they would wed Davis, and Wilsdorf Hans was outside one day talking to Alfred, his much older brother-in-law. During their conversation, James Davis and future intentions for them, Hans informed him that he felt confident enough to launch his own company of watches, but all he really needed was some money. Alfred was financially capable and had the knowledge to Hans was a watch enthusiast. Despite his youth, he took a chance upon the German and claimed to be assisting him with his business and was prepared to put his money into it. They shook hands and exchanged money. They established Wilsdorf and Davis in 1905. Limited that eventually would transform a few years later. Rolex, they collaborated with a Swiss timepiece, a business called Hermann Egler, which founded in Switzerland and began bringing in movements from Switzerland, bringing them to England and placing them under watch cases. They also established a workplace in Bienne, Switzerland, will benefit his business venture there quickly after. They began focusing on the distribution of reasonably priced watches rates, despite the fact that Hans was a fan of wristwatch was one significant item he had. Bad impression of the watch industry pocket timepieces. At the period, most people wore wristwatches, used as ornaments by ladies and were observed some people looked down on, with the rationale being not keeping good timekeeping records. These timepieces were substantially more compact than pocket watches, which were made up of smaller actions that would frequently cause the clocks fluctuate in speed due to little adjustments to the movements. This was the primary justification for pocket watches at the time, more well-liked, and was regarded as macho due to its large stature. However, Hans generally found it difficult to use every time. It was a small problem for him. He had to put his hand in the air one more a pocket to view the time, particularly when his hands were occupied. It was formerly believed to be virtually. It is impossible to produce the ideal wristwatch that could reliably display the precise moment and be used frequently. Personally, I think that pocket watches will almost entirely vanish, and that watches will take their place absolutely 1914 for Hans Wilsdorf. Hans prophesied that eventually, the new trend was going to be wristwatches. Everyone, and was totally accepted as the committed to figuring out how to build buying the best wristwatch for it. The upcoming years traveling to several countries of Europe came together. Numerous watchmakers to consider the minute components of watches during those years. He began to distribute start-wearing watches starting in the same year. He started his business one watch later. He was working on developing another, better, more dependable and superior applied to men's and women's wristwatches. The lessons he picked up from other watchmakers soon after his crew left on his voyage started to gain traction. And by 1908, it was a leading business in the England's watchmaking industry, Rolex. By this time, Hans intended to rename his business to something upscale, catchy, and simple to pronounce regardless of language, and it needed to be brief, so a dial of could easily accommodate the name, a watch. He took his time blending everything. The following 5 letters in the alphabet, until finally Rolex. Something came up the birth. He realized right away that it was the ideal. One day after that, he registered, using the term Rolex as a trademark for, in 1908, Wilsdorf and Davis Limited. Over the ensuing years, Rolex was gaining recognition for its excellent caliber wristwatches, and numerous wealthy individuals I had previously begun using it. But it didn't take place long after World War I erupted, and numerous businesses, including watch companies, were fighting for survival, even forced to close its doors in nonetheless, not a Rolex. This horrible occurrence only increased Hans' company, that is more well known because to its watches that are already trustworthy. Many Rolex watches were handed to soldiers, as opposed to pocket watches because a lot safer and simpler to use. It also aided in their improved coordination. Their strikes due of its accuracy on schedule. At that point, the business had reached such to the degree that they had 60 employees. People had large open offices in 1914. Locations in London. Rolex has a plan to increase their repute, won the first wristwatch ever. Switzerland's rating for chronometers, then a class and a certificate of precision from the Kew Observatory in London. This increased the brand's credibility for consumers to buy. However, not everything was rosy, and Britain's Rainbows for Hans campaign in 1914. 33 tax was applied to all firms. Registered in the United Kingdom that importing products from abroad borders, Hans grew really worried about it. So his business relocated its head office from London to Switzerland. Good. The taxes mentioned, he also did it for the following reasons. Persons from Britain who served in the global war disliked the Germans more and more, given that Hans Wilsdorf's name was obviously German. And despite having registered before that, he was still utilizing the named Wilsdorf and Davis in England, was ridiculed by others. Additionally, this caused him to entirely change his business name, came from Wilsdorf and AMP. Davis, the Rolex Watch Corporation alone restricted in 1915. Later on, Hans would also sign up. The renowned trademark logo of Rolex 5-star crown that was put into practice then, the dial of their phone watches the Rolex Watch Company in 1919, its principal office from Bienne to where it still stands today, in Geneva starting now. The business concentrated on the watch movements are made and they would be sent to Geneva. And where they meticulously checked the movements were precise, and they were finished with their upscale style, and introducing their goods, Hans would travel to Geneva from this location. All-out effort with his team to enhance the technological advancements in wristwatches. We need to make the watch case successfully, such that our movements will be restricted perpetual protection from harm produced by heat, sweat, and dust, and icy. Only then will absolute precision of fasten the Rolex watch, thanks to his persistence and patience. Eventually, it paid off greatly. Time Rolex debuted a new model in 1926. That would alter the watch for good. Industry, the first ever Rolex Oyster historical waterproof wristwatch. This new design had a very strong seal. Constrained situation that produced an ideal safeguards for the little watch movements, causing it to be waterproof inside. Hans was aware of its revolutionary nature, and people would undoubtedly be intrigued by, although he chose to hold out until the ideal chance to expose it to the universe in a really original manner, the brilliant marketing mind. Hans learned about a woman from in 1927, a man from London named Mercedes Glitza, who being able to swim over the English Canal that is 20.5 miles long, the body of water separating France and England. She was in a set because no one believed her. To perform it once more in front of thousands despite the temperature of the water, individuals warmer, it was Hans recognized the chance and was optimistic. Rolex Oyster watch for her to flaunt around after swimming for more than 10 women was removed from the water after hours. After nearly dying from the cold and making it as approximately 45% of the way across. The work was not finished on the Channel Achievement, but the Rolex Oyster emerged from the water in excellent shape. People became obsessed with the watch and Hans after the publicity, an advertisement was placed. Outside the London Daily Mail newspaper articles regarding the occasion, the height to which Rolex rose global recognition as a revolutionary watch, Hans also marketed the event to increase the buzz. His fish bowls inside his Rolex Oyster with live fish in it, and a list of all of the Rolex dealers' individuals to observe as they passed by. This brilliant plan executed flawlessly. When consumers were addicted to the goods by this time, Hans had made the decision to heavily market. Therefore, in 1928, he worked with the Rolex, the time's top British model, Evelyn, to advertise his watches, and of course, she was captured on camera. She was seen wearing her watch inside a fishbowl. In 1933, the publicity didn't end there. I noticed Rolex Oysters in the newspaper, once more regarding a flight over Mount, which Everest's crew members who wore their Rolexes, which were highly pleased to observe that following the flight, their timepieces remained 100. Functional, another instance occurred when the renowned Malcolm Campbell, the driver, set a speed record for traveling at almost 300 miles per hour in 1935 while wearing a Rolex. Hans requested his approval to make public. Malcolm agreed to it. While denying to at this time, people started to consider the Rolex not just as a high excellent watch that doubles as a dependable, and technological a universal wristwatch that is suitable for regular use. To succeed, only excellent marketing is required. Firm prospers fresh models. Rolex continue to operate at this time. Captivate audiences when they are introduced. The Rolex Oyster, their upgraded model Perpetual, which debuted in 1931, waterproof and self-winding, always see its prior iteration of the Rolex Oyster, was a wonderful accomplishment. But the difficulty was that you had to frequently wind the watch by hand, which it more challenging due of its tightness case. The oyster crown had to be unscrewed. Wind it first, then tighten it once more. This self-winding watch was created as a that for generations. Individuals have attempted to ideal, but none emerged triumphant. From Hans also created some from 1934 to 1940. Superior timepieces outside of the Rolex company, and registered it under his own name. But it was abandoned because the enmity between Americans, British, and French Germany was on the markets. Notwithstanding all of his accomplishments, Hans would occasionally find it difficult to get by market, and had to place twice the attempt to build a successful business under his German name. During the outbreak of World War II, Rolex adopted a tough hit. It became challenging and pricey to exporting goods from Switzerland to various other significant European markets. Hans was angry about the circumstance, and to add yet another tragedy to his terrible luck following the 1944 death of his wife, he created a memorial in honor of his wife. Charity called the Wilsdorf Foundation Group, working on social issues, anything to talk about. Right before Hans' passing, he transferred ownership of 100 of Rolex to the Foundation for Wilsdorf, which still holds control over and owns Rolex in today. Rolex will never be made public as a result. They will never be bought, sold, or subject to taxation, mostly because it is a charity. As World War II ended, Rolex began to take off, and greatly too. To give you an idea, Rolex had sold in 1946 its certified 50000 Rolex timepiece, which they began certifying 20 years ago. By the following year, 1947, their sales had reached their 100,000 certified Rolex milestone, increasing their sales by twofold from 2 decades worth of time in 1 year. Its success was supported by his newfound model introduced in 1945. The watch date, just the first self-winding waterproof watch that displays the date on the dial, month. Then there was another after that, approximately 10 years of a groundbreaking design. The initial Rolex day date later, self-winding and waterproof wristwatch should include the date of the event, not only the weekday, but also the month. These watch models are still popular today, currently, which is frequently the norm for regular wristwatch usage. In the 1950s, Rolex consistently released the most inventive watch series. The Rolex Submariner was one that was renowned. It was the first deep freezer to be released in 1953. Water-resistant wristwatch for diving, reach a depth of 100 meters in the ocean. Avoiding being dysfunctional, Hans Wilsdorf passed away in 1960. Rolex began to, after his death, present itself as the upscale company that it is. The business now concentrating their marketing that focuses more on exclusivity collection of high-end watches society, which contributed another element. Considering that Rolex was founded in 1985 to use 904 LA to make their watches extremely robust and pricey, steel being the first watch to do so in history, it is among the causes of their Rolex continues to command pricey prices today. The most well-known watch manufacturer in the world, from a little boy who was abandoned, Hans Wilsdorf, went after nothing on his own journey, and is in charge of altering the watch industry to what we know today. His love of technological and design innovation has placed him on the list of one of the most influential men in the industry, and his legacy can be seen today in every person wearing a Rolex. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to subscribe, and until the next one.